Senator Castro, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At first, I thought the Prime Sponsor's testimony was sufficient until I kept hearing the repeat of things like two companies, other comments, special interests, other comments that I'm looking the other way as a member of this body. No, instead, I think to the contrary, I rise in support of 9534 because I'm looking right down that barrel. While I share the very passionate sentiments of the previous speakers about the need to pay attention to light and noise pollution or to preserve the natural beauty of the island, my position on 95 is basically about the whole law and how antiquated it is. You see, Madam Speaker, based on the testimony provided at the public hearing and on subsequent submissions and input thereafter, it's apparent that the problem isn't inherent in the kind of business they're in. It's so clear to me that the problem is in the system of government and the regulations that are currently in place. You know, it's so unfortunate that the same minds in the room, so articulate and passionate, weren't part of the deliberate process of planning in earlier settings so that we can address this and keep abreast with the changes of things like in the industry or even the community's priorities or even regulations relative to national and international policy. But be that as it may, Madam Speaker, what I'm seeing here is that we're faced with the reality of a situation that pits the opinion of a few people, against how this government has been operating based on an existing set of regulations passed and utilized by this territory for decades. As the retiring speaker kept referencing, unfortunately, there are real people, real lives, real families and businesses affected by this. I wish my other colleague was in the room so I can address him directly and ask the question, where were you 14 years ago? As a matter of fact, just as a point of information to my colleagues, we're talking about original legislation from 1980. And if anyone's read the legislation, in those two legislatures prior to today, they said nothing about lit signs, nothing about LED. As a matter of fact, I couldn't find an operational definition of the word non-flashing, non-moving. You know, in reality, the earlier speaker, I thought, was probably the only one who hit it right on the head, that this is an issue about electronic signage. This is not about two sign companies, not even about 20. You take a stroll from Anderson to Naval Station, and you cannot count how many lit signs there are. Thousands. And maybe that's another point of contention. Calgary Church, St. John's, I can go on. And what you're really saying here, we don't take a proactive position to protect the interests of those who have invested in this community, is that we're almost requiring them, if someone threatens, like they did in the media, that it's all or nothing and you want to shut them all down because the law is silent. I can understand, Madam Speaker, if these issues were new, but they're not. In one or more cases, we're talking about activities that have been going on for more than a decade. So to act overnight and request that such operations be stripped of those permits already granted to them is not only unreasonable, it's outright wrong. It hurts local families. It sends the wrong message that it can affect our collective future. And it does nothing. It does nothing to correct the wrong of the past. Perhaps, if one of the previous speakers or even a colleague who had the audacity to threaten families and operating businesses would offer legislation that provides due recompense for monies invested and anticipated loss of income, then maybe perhaps I would be much more amenable. But this is not the case. Senators, we've got to be careful about what we are attempting to communicate to innovators, to existing businesses, to future investments. Because let me tell you what that narrative, to use the retiring speaker's phrase, this is what that narrative tells people. That, you know what, after you submit an application for variance or what have you, and a decade goes by and you pour more money into your business, that all of a sudden, because the law is silent and one lawmaker decides that the silence of the law constitutes a breach for all businesses, to me, that's outright ludicrous. It's been said publicly by a member of this body who's probably not here to defend his or herself, that we're a nation of reason governed by laws designed to protect our pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I challenge my colleagues to protect that right and lawful order. But where does it say, Madam Speaker, that we have to admonish our fellow man based on an antiquated rule? And I do agree with the previous speaker, but I'll rephrase her question. If we weren't a people based on a living constitution and an evolving set of laws, where would we be? I really genuinely hope, Madam Speaker, we can find common ground here on the need to protect those families, small businesses who have gone through the process, to quote another speaker, who have made the necessary investments, who have paid their tax dollars, who have not only been compliant, but have been responsible, contributing members of this society. Let's be crystal clear about one thing. If there's a wrong here, it rests with us, the government of Guam. And I just want to close with the following sentiments. I just can't understand how we can rise here at a podium with a listening audience and wield the power and influence of this government to hurt people. In this case, where the law is silent and where there's a difference of opinions, instead of picking up the phone and going down to the regulatory agency to work on a solution, some choose to fire a volley across the bow of unsuspecting, hardworking families using the media. I encourage us, Madam Speaker, to stop this practice of policy by press release. How do we allow that to be so common? That's what gave rise to my support of Senator San Nicolas's bill. You don't threaten people like that. No one. Someone asked me, did a regulatory agency come down and ask them to stop? I said, no, but I'm not going to wait for that day. And I'm not talking about those 2 or 3 sign companies that have been granted variances. I'm talking about everybody for which the statute is silent. And we're talking about LED signs. I don't know if they're non-flashing or non-moving or all of the above or none of it. Now that we're here, now that we're all duly elected and equally responsible for the fate of our people and the future of this island, I'm here to stand firmly against those who choose to use government to hurt rather than to empower. I'm here to as a representative to ensure that you don't stand and threaten the livelihood of families without being unchecked. These are not fictitious people. This is not a philosophical exercise. This is going to affect a segment of our society, of those folks who went through the process, who had counsel, as another member, and I made a note, who had the counsel of at least half a dozen government entities, and had to stand and publicly answer questions about their petition for a variance. I don't think it's reasonable, nor should we allow threats calling for ex post facto shutdown without reprieve to go unchecked. Thank you, Madam Speaker.